The glass didn't shatter when it hit the floor. It cracked. One clean split down the center and sat there in two perfect halves on the marble, like something that had been waiting a long time to break. No one moved to pick it up. Nadia stood at the edge of the dining room with her hands at her sides and looked at the two halves of the wine glass and thought, very clearly, that she should leave. Not just the room, not just the dinner. She should leave the way she had been thinking about leaving for 4 years. With her car keys and her phone, and nothing that belonged to the Hartwell family, which was almost everything in the house except the clothes she had come in with, and the small black notebook she kept in her coat pocket. She didn't leave. She walked back to her chair and sat down, and the dinner continued. The Hartwells held their annual family gathering at the estate in Westchester every spring, and every spring since she had married Owen, Nadia had arrived with the same careful preparation and left with the same quiet damage. She had learned, over the years, to pack lightly in the emotional sense, to bring only what she could carry back out. The estate was the kind of house that appeared in architectural magazines under headlines about legacy and American heritage. Owen's father, Richard Hartwell, had built the original structure in the 1970s and expanded it twice. The grounds ran for 6 acres. There was a greenhouse that nobody used, and a tennis court that Owen's mother, Sylvia, insisted on keeping because she said it maintained the look of the property, though Nadia had never seen anyone play on it in 4 years. She had tried, once, in the 2nd year of her marriage, to bring a dish to the gathering, her grandmother's sweet potato pie, the recipe written in her grandmother's handwriting on an index card that Nadia had laminated and kept in her kitchen drawer. She had made it the night before and carried it in a covered dish and set it on the dessert table before anyone else arrived. When the dessert course came, the pie was not on the table. She found it later in the kitchen, still covered, sitting next to the trash can. A catering assistant told her she thought it was something that had been left over from a previous event. Nadia did not say anything. She drove home with the pie on the passenger seat and ate it alone at her kitchen counter at 11 o'clock at night. And it was very good, and she thought about her grandmother, who had grown up with nothing and built something anyway. And she told herself that was enough for now. It was not enough, but she told herself it was. She had met Owen at a conference in San Francisco 8 years ago. He was presenting a panel on venture capital strategy. She was the keynote speaker. She had built her company, Luminary Systems, from a rented office space in Atlanta with 2 employees and a business plan she had revised 47 times before she stopped counting. By the time she met Owen Hartwell, Luminary was operating in 11 cities, and she had been named to 3 national lists. She never mentioned in conversation, because she found the practice of listing her own achievements uncomfortable, even when she was alone. Owen had approached her after her keynote. He was charming and direct and genuinely curious about her work in a way that most people in his position were not. He asked about her company's infrastructure model and listened to her answer without looking at his phone. That was what she had noticed first, that he was actually listening. They had dinner that night and talked for 4 hours. She married him 14 months later in a small ceremony that Owen's mother attended with the expression of someone who had been informed of a medical procedure they had not consented to. The comments began early. Sylvia Hartwell operated in the language of implication. She did not say things directly. She suggested them and then looked away and waited for the words to settle. At the first family gathering, she had looked at Nadia's dress, a simple navy wrap dress that Nadia had chosen carefully, and said, "How interesting. I've never seen that style on someone your age." She had smiled after she said it. The smile was worse than the words. At the second gathering, Sylvia had introduced Nadia to a family friend as Owen's wife from Atlanta, with a particular emphasis on from Atlanta that carried with it an entire geography of assumptions. The family friend had nodded and said, "Oh, Atlanta. You must love it up here then," as if Nadia had come from somewhere that required relief. In the 3rd year, Owen's brother Pierce had started a conversation at the dinner table about investment portfolios and looked directly at Owen the entire time, despite the fact that Nadia was the only person at the table who managed one. When she offered a perspective on asset diversification, Pierce had nodded slowly in the way people nod when they are waiting for someone to stop talking, and then turned back to Owen and continued as though she had not spoken. Owen, across the table, had caught her eye. He had not said anything either. She understood that too. Owen Hartwell loved her in the way that some men love things they are not sure they deserve, with intensity and also with a strange passivity, as if loving her was something that happened to him rather than something he chose. He was good to her in private. In front of his family, he became something smaller than himself. She had talked to him about it. 3 times in the first year, twice in the second, once in the third, and then she had stopped talking about it, because the conversation always ended the same way. He would hold her hands and tell her she was the most remarkable person he had ever known, and she would believe him, and then the next gathering would come, and he would sit at the table and become small again, and she would drive home with the quiet damage and add it to everything she was already carrying. She had not told her business partner, Rochelle, about most of it. Rochelle had grown up with Nadia in the same neighborhood in southwest Atlanta, had been her roommate in college, had stood next to her when Luminary signed its first major contract, and had an opinion about Owen Hartwell's family that she expressed without being asked. "You don't have to go," Rochelle had told her, the morning of the 5th gathering. "You are a woman who built a company from an idea and a folding table in a rented room. You do not have to sit through a dinner with people who think you should be grateful to be invited." Nadia had looked at her coffee cup. "I know," she said. She went anyway. The dinner this year was larger than usual. Richard Hartwell's 65th birthday coincided with the gathering, and there had been a deliberate expansion of the guest list. Nadia counted 31 people at the main table alone, and another 20 or so at the adjacent tables, arranged in the East Dining Room. Among the guests were a sitting state senator, a federal appellate judge who had clerked for a Supreme Court justice, the CEO of a regional bank, and 3 people Nadia recognized from her own industry: a software executive she had met at a conference in Chicago, and 2 investors whose names appeared on term sheets she had reviewed. She had nodded to the software executive across the room. He had raised his glass. Owen had not noticed. The dinner began with the formalities the Hartwell family imposed on all gatherings. The seating arrangement curated by Sylvia. The wine selection announced by Richard as though it required gratitude. The family toast that referenced the Hartwell legacy in terms usually reserved for founding documents. Nadia sat 3 seats from Owen, across from Pierce and his wife, Amber, who had the practiced warmth of someone who had trained herself to be polite to Nadia without being friendly. The first 2 courses passed without incident. Then the conversation turned, as it often turned at Hartwell dinners, to the question of purpose. It was Pierce who started it. He was talking about philanthropy, specifically, about a foundation the Hartwell family was considering establishing. He used the word legacy 5 times in 4 minutes. He talked about building something that would last, something that would carry the family name forward into the next generation, something that represented real contribution. Nadia listened. She thought about the scholarship fund she had established 4 years ago through Luminary, which had sent 63 students from underserved communities to college. She had not named it after herself. It was called the Foundation Forward Program, and it ran quietly, without press releases, because she had not built it to be noticed. She did not mention it. She was deciding whether to say something about the family foundation idea. She had thoughts about structure and administration and long-term impact that were genuinely useful. When Pierce turned to Owen and said, "We need to think about what the next generation of Hartwells is actually contributing. Real contribution. Not just writing checks." He did not look at Nadia. She looked at him, and then Owen said, "Pierce is right. The Hartwell name has to mean something." The way he said it, the weight he put on the family name, the particular inflection of belonging that did not include her, was something she recognized. She had heard it before in smaller moments, in different rooms, but she had never heard it quite like this, in front of 31 people and a federal judge and the CEO of a bank. She set down her fork. "I think contribution takes a lot of forms," she said. Her voice was even. "Some of them are visible, and some of them aren't, and the ones that aren't are sometimes the ones that matter most." Pierce looked at her. It was the first time during the meal that he had looked directly at her. "Sure," he said. "Of course." He said it the way people say of course when they mean the opposite. And then Sylvia Hartwell, from the end of the table, said, "Nadia, dear, would you mind helping Margaret with the water?" Margaret was one of the servers. Sylvia said it pleasantly, with the smile she always used, and the table heard it and did not respond, and the table's silence was its own kind of answer. Nadia looked at Sylvia. She looked at Owen. Owen was looking at his wine glass. She stood up. She was going to say something measured and appropriate. She had been composing measured and appropriate responses to this family for 4 years, and she had a library of them, carefully organized, available on short notice. What came out instead was, "I'm not a server, Sylvia." The table went quiet. It was not a dramatic quiet. It was the quiet of people recalibrating, adjusting their understanding of what kind of evening this was going to be. Sylvia's smile did not change. "Of course not, dear. I only thought—" "I know what you thought," Nadia said. And then Owen put his hand on her arm. Not gently. He gripped her forearm the way you grip something you are trying to stop. And he said, quietly but not quietly enough, "Nadia, don't do this." She looked at his hand on her arm. She looked at his face. In it she saw, not cruelty. Owen Hartwell was not a cruel man, but something she had been refusing to name for 4 years. Embarrassment. Not at his family. At her. At the fact that she was not absorbing this quietly the way she always absorbed things quietly. At the fact that she was becoming, in this moment, a problem he would have to manage. She removed his hand from her arm. She said very clearly, "Let go of me." He did. But the way he did it, pulling back as though she had burned him, straightening in his chair, glancing around the table to assess the damage, told her everything she had been refusing to know. She picked up her clutch from the back of her chair. She walked out of the dining room. The sound of her heels on the marble floor was very loud in the silence. And then she reached the hallway and the door and the cold air outside, and the sound stopped. Rochelle was at the hotel. Nadia had made a reservation there, separately, because she had learned in the 3rd year to make a separate reservation. She drove there in 18 minutes and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before she went in. In the hotel room, she changed out of her dress and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her phone. Owen had called twice. She did not call back. Rochelle knocked at 10:30 with a bottle of sparkling water and the expression of someone who had been waiting to say something for several years. "Before you say anything," Nadia said. "I'm not going to say anything," Rochelle said. She sat in the chair by the window. They sat in silence for a moment. "He grabbed my arm," Nadia said. Rochelle was quiet. He wasn't trying to hurt me. But he grabbed my arm in front of all of them and told me not to do this, like I was doing something to him. Like I was the one being unreasonable. "You have been reasonable for 4 years," Rochelle said. "You have been so reasonable." Nadia looked at the wall. "I left a dinner with 31 people," she said, "including the senator from this district and 2 investors I know professionally. I walked out of a room—" "Good," Rochelle said. Nadia looked at her. "You know what happened when you walked out of that room," Rochelle said. "You know what those 31 people had to sit with after you left." She found out later. From the software executive she had nodded to across the room, who sent her a message the following morning. What had happened in the dining room after she walked out? The senator had put down her fork. The federal judge had looked at Owen and said, quietly, "I hope you understand what just happened here." Owen had not responded. Pierce had made a comment. Something about temperament, something about the difficulty of blending families. And the senator had looked at him with an expression that ended the comment. The software executive's message said, "I've been meaning to reach out to you about a project for the past 6 months and kept putting it off. After tonight, I'm not putting it off anymore. Can we find time to talk this week? She sat with that message for a long time. The following Tuesday, at 6:47 in the evening, Nadia was in her office at Luminary's New York location, finishing a review of a partnership proposal, when her assistant sent her a text. You're on CNN. Right now. Channel on in the conference room. She walked down the hall to the conference room. The television was on. The graphic on the screen read, Breaking. Luminary Systems confirms 2-4 acquisition offer. The anchor was reading from a prepared statement. In the corner of the screen, there was a photograph. Her photograph, her name, her title. Her phone began to ring. She stood in the doorway of the conference room and watched the anchor say her name. And she thought about the dining room in Westchester, and the wine glass cracked in two halves on the marble, and the sound of her heels in the hallway, and the way 31 people had sat in silence while Owen gripped her arm, and she thought about her grandmother's sweet potato pie sitting next to the trash can in a Hartwell kitchen. She thought about 63 students who had gone to college because of a program no one had named after her. She thought about the folding table in the rented office in Atlanta, and the business plan she had revised 47 times, and the morning she had signed the lease on Luminary's first real office and sat in the empty space alone for half an hour before anyone else arrived, because she had wanted a moment to understand what it meant. Her phone was still ringing. She answered it. Owen called that night. Then 3 more times. Then his mother called, from a number Nadia had never seen Sylvia use, and left a voicemail that was 11 seconds long and said, in the voice of someone who had been practicing, Nadia, this is Sylvia. I think we should talk. She did not call back. Pierce sent a text. It said, heard the news. Congratulations. Let's catch up. No punctuation except the period. She looked at it for a moment and put her phone face down. The senator's office called on Wednesday. The senator wanted to discuss a technology initiative she was sponsoring. Workforce development in underserved communities, structured over a 5-year implementation period. The senator's chief of staff said that Luminary had been on their list for a while, and the senator had been hoping to find the right moment. Nadia said she would be happy to schedule a call. Rochelle came to the office on Thursday with lunch and sat across from Nadia's desk and watched her eat for a moment. You know what I keep thinking about, Rochelle said. Tell me, those 31 people at that table, they're going to think about that dinner for a long time. Nadia considered that. Good, she said. The judge, the senator, the investors you know, the software executive already reached out. I know. Rochelle smiled. It was a specific kind of smile, the kind that holds many years of watching someone be underestimated and waiting, with patience, for the accounting. I know he did. Nadia looked out the window. Outside, the city moved at its own pace, indifferent and enormous, and full of people who had built things from nothing, and people who had inherited things, and people who had been told, in various rooms, in various ways, that they were less than they were. She had been one of those people. She had sat at tables where she was invisible, and spoken into silences that didn't answer, and carried the damage home, and set it down quietly, and picked it up again in the morning. She did not want to do that anymore. She had her lawyer contact Owen's lawyer on Friday. The paperwork would take months, and she understood that, and she was prepared to wait. She was good at waiting. She had learned to wait with intention, not passively, not with hope that things would change without action, but with the knowledge that the right time was not always the immediate time, and that some things needed to be prepared before they could be released. She filed. On the day the filing was confirmed, she drove to her office early, before anyone else arrived, and sat in the chair by the window in her corner office. The office she had decorated herself, with the framed photograph of the original Luminary team. 4 people standing in front of a glass door with a paper sign taped to it, and she sat there in the early morning quiet for a while. Then she opened her laptop. She had a senator's office to call back and a software executive's proposal to review, and 63 students whose scholarship renewals needed to be confirmed before the end of the month. She started with the scholarships.